Welcome back, fellow druids, to Full Circle. I'm Chad, and today what I want to talk about, this is a new episode type, I guess, new segment type, whatever, what I'm calling opposition. And what I'll do, these type of videos will be talking about what you'll see across the table. So a lot of discussions we have are about what circle is, what they do, how to build a list for them, what each piece is looking for your list. This is going to be talking about the opponent, right? What they're bringing, what you need to think about to take care of that. I'm either going to be looking at possibly specific lists as like boogeyman lists come up, specific casters potentially, or specific factions, maybe a specific theme even, right? Like we may do one on say we would do one talking about Winter Guard Command in Cato or something. I'll probably try to keep them with things that are going to be a little bit popular, and maybe with things that I have a little more experience in, because I would rather not get into a situation where I get up here and talk about how to absolutely 100% beat I don't know, Crix or something, and then give you bad information. So we'll see how these go. But the first one I want to start with is talking about Grymkin. So Grymkin have been out now for about 6 months, give or take for some of the pieces, but about 6 months. They released in July, lock and load. We've seen them, a lot of people actually gravitate towards them. It's been a pretty successful small faction. I would say much more successful than Convergence, at least not as, I don't know about from like a sales perspective, but from a like showing up at a tournament perspective, I think Grymkin much more quickly has come into prominence in the game, and that part's fantastic actually. So if you're playing Circle, which I assume is the purpose of why you're watching my show, we're going to talk about the things to keep in mind, and the things that you're going to want to make sure you build into your list. So real quick, just want to run down the situations that are unique about Grymkin. So it is a standalone faction, has some unique rules. First of all, there are 6 warlocks, the only one of which who has a traditional feat is the Old Witch 3, I guess she is, for this faction. The other 5 are referred to as Defiers, and they have what are called Arcana. And Arcana are, each one has what they call a Trump Arcana, and so that is, sorry, I should back up. When you play against a Defier, they have to choose, instead of having a feat, they get access to 3 Arcana, which are sort of like a little bit worse than feats, but a little bit like, I wouldn't quite call them mini feats, but they're all triggered based on certain actions within the game. Each Defier has a single Arcana, which is unique to them, which is called the Trump Arcana. Unfortunate name choice given our current political environment, but is not related. This is thinking of a Trump like if you're playing an old card game. And so they have to take that one, and then they can choose 2 out of the additional, I believe, 10 that they have access to. And that's going to allow them to uniquely cater how they're playing to their opponent in a lot of ways. But they're also, a lot of people look at them because they read the effects and see that like, oh, it looks like you've got 3 feats. But do keep in mind, so the first thing with them is they are all triggered. We'll talk about things to consider with that really, in a little bit. They all have to be triggered, and only one can be triggered per turn. So you will never have a turn where you're dealing with like this trifecta of overpowerful, like not quite feats. Their power level varies, and which one you're going to see in a matchup is dependent on your opponent, and then how it triggers is dependent on you. So that's their unique, their most unique feature. They also are a little bit more of a trickier faction. They are hard hitting though. I would say they're not in general a ranged faction, so that's just something to remember. They do have ranged components, but they're not as many of them. They have 2 theme forces. One is, I'm not going to go into the full like list of them, but one is Bump in the Night, and that is basically their infantry, more infantry-centric theme force, and they have Dark Menagerie, which is their more War Beast-centric theme force. I would say all of their warlocks can play in the War Beast. I've seen every warlock built, with the exception of the Old Witch, I think. Maybe even her. I've seen them all built in the War Beast theme. I have not necessarily seen them all built in the infantry theme. Notably, I don't think you'll ever see the child in that theme. And I think... yeah, I think the rest you'll see in some shape or form outside of there. So just that to keep in mind. A lot of the time they do hit. They do have the ability to play either their War Beast or their infantry. So things to note. So let's talk about. I'm going to actually break this down by theme force as we go through it and talk about what to look for there. So one of the things is even if when you get done listening to this episode, the first key thing to do is make sure that you either spend some time and read through War Room and look at what their cards do. And even if you do that, regardless of if you do that or not, but even if you do, I would still ask throughout the game or at the beginning of the game, when they select their Arcana, what they do and what triggers them. And I would absolutely make sure that you know the answers to those two questions. A lot of times you can avoid triggers by having things like RFP, or just like there's easy ways to avoid some of the triggers. Some of them it doesn't really matter if you do or not. You need to play around them in other ways. But you should know those. And then you should obviously know the effect. You should also know, and you should also keep track of like which one has been used so that you're not trying to play around something that they can't any longer use. So that's the first thing I would do. Next is, and I said next, but there's no real order with this. I'm just going through my thoughts. Next is for if they're playing a Dark Menagerie theme, so this is the War Beast theme, a couple things of note. For the first thing is they're going to have 4 Gremlin Swarms in there, which means that if you have a list that's prepared to go into Grymkin, you need to have access to a caster who can decently easily get magic attacks out there. The stealth is obviously going to be another thing if you can ignore it or deal with it in melee safely enough and so on. That's going to be key to the matchup, because I have watched players, not necessarily circle players because we do have more magic attacks, but I have watched players flat out lose a game to Grymkin because they just flat out didn't have enough magic weapons. If your caster is your only magic weapon, you need to be very careful with where you place and make sure that you can actually use that to clear out those Gremlin Swarms. They can use them to prevent you effectively from charging, not because you can't go through them, they're incorporeal models, but because they can put them in the landing spots that you are hoping to get, and it doesn't matter that you can go through them, you can't land on them. So that's one thing. Another is that's their Fury management, so it allows them to more comfortably play more War Beasts. They are fantastic at contesting zones and scoring flags and contesting flags and the like, because they're solos, they're incorporeal, and they're stealth. Their defense is slightly high, they have 5 wounds. They're actually just very tricky to kill. So you need to make sure when you're playing into those games that you are prepared to deal with the inevitability that a Gremlin Swarm is sitting somewhere on the table and you need to be able to remove it. The next thing is their heavy War Beasts primarily are function off of corpses. A Skin and Moans that doesn't get corpses is a 13-16 with POW 16 attacks. It is unremarkable. It is very easily killed, and keep that in mind. As it gets corpses, which the Death Knell can give to them, or the Dreadrots can give to them, or they can get from themselves if they kill some infantry, or War Beast or 2, is going to be a very... what do I say? Like, if you can keep, don't necessarily be overzealous about this, but if you can keep corpses off of them, do so, because it's going to make them much easier to deal with and make them have a harder time dealing with you. The Cage Rager is important to note that it really only needs to have 1 corpse. It may end up with more. 1 corpse means that it is an arc node. It additionally means that they can use that corpse to negate a spell of yours. So if you have offensive spells and they are familiar with them, they're going to use the Cage Rager to place it within 3 inches of the thing that you want to put that on, and you're going to need to be able to cast as many, a lot of times to get rid of those corpses potentially. You also want to note that that they're an arc node, as I was saying. So those are the things that the corpses do there. The linchpin of a lot of that is going to be the Death Knell. And the Death Knell is a battle, more or less, it's a battle engine that does have a melee attack, and it does have Entropic Force, which means no tough and healing within 5 inches of it. The most important piece of it, though, is that it hands corpses out, it collects corpses, and then hands them back out to the War Beasts. It also gives +2 armor as long as it has a singular corpse on it. So it can't collect. They can't just kill their own models to get corpses unless they have like some type of terrain that will kill them for them. So keep that in mind. And I believe it has to be from an attack or from collateral or a continuous effect, something like that. So like Electro Leaps won't give it corpses. So again, if you're in a position where you can kill the Death Knell, or you should leverage yourself into a position where you can kill the Death Knell, that's going to reduce the armor by 2 of everything within its aura. And that means things like Skin and Bones, which could go up to armor and strength, or armor 21. Cage Ragers can get up to, I think it's also 21, and a few other things like that. Being able to keep them down at 19 or less is going to be very important for you. There's a few other support things, but that's kind of the thing to watch out for with the War Beast themes. The Rattler will kill a lot of infantry. Do not bunch up. If you play Circle and you enjoy using Skull or a Bloodweaver Night Witch is one actually, or the Ravager White Mane, anything like that that can like Pac-Man through stuff. If you don't want their War Beast to Pac-Man through you, be very careful of your spacing around. The Rattler has Berserk and Overtake and 1-inch melee, so you can actually get into a lot of infantry if you're not careful. Or you can get a lot of infantry killed, rather. The Gorehound has extended control, so watch out for that. You'll see that in either theme. It's kind of a decent utility piece. And then the other thing to really make sure you take note of are Krabbits. So for the most part, these are just ridiculously cheap and easy to maneuver around shield guards. They are like 2.5 points a piece, or 3. Pardon me. I think they're 7 points for 2, actually. And they're a pretty lightly armored shield guard, but they have leap and a few other things, and they're sort of the linchpin again to a lot of things. But you're going to have a lot of trouble shooting into them. They can pass different damage around. So that's what to watch. That's what to watch for against the War Beast theme. Against the infantry theme, just going to go over a few things. First of all, they're the guys with lances, the little small base guys, are power 7 armor piercing, and they're cavalry, so they're pretty accurate if they get a charge off. They are pretty deadly if they get a charge off with damage. They're pretty lame if they can't charge. Things like Rebuke on them is going to be fantastic, especially if you can. They're going to play Eilish with that list a lot to prevent that from being a problem. But if you can kill him and get Rebuke, that's going to be really good for you. If you can just jam them with stuff, right, that they are going to have a hard time killing melee, that's going to be pretty good. On the other side, you have their shooting unit, which is the the Hollow Men. They have Eyeless Sight, something to keep in mind. They also, if they kill living models, they can add back to the unit up to their full size. And they're otherwise like really crappy trenchers, but do keep in mind that in that faction there are a lot of ways to amp up the amount of damage that they're doing. You have Curse of Shadows on a caster, you've got the Heretics like Prey type thing. With someone like Wanderer, they can stay alive a lot longer than you'd think. There are actually a lot of ways to make them useful. And the fact that they are Eyeless Sight from the beginning is pretty big. They also pretty much can't be jammed because they have Apparition as a unit. So something to keep in mind there. Otherwise, they're mostly just a shooting unit, though. Dreadrots, I kind of mentioned, they're sort of the stock standard infantry. They are Power 10 Weapon Masters, so don't like super ignore them. They will hurt stuff decently well, you know, if they do get a charge off, but I don't think they're exceptional. They're like 12-14s with single wound. Otherwise, some of their other pieces, so Lord Longfellow is absolutely somebody to make sure you're keeping track of on the table, because he has Finisher and I think it's called Fortune Hunter. So if he shoots a character model, he gets an additional die to hit and damage, and then he has Finisher, which means he gets an additional die to damage against something that is damaged. Which means he can kill your caster pretty dead if he gets a shot off. So I think he's range 8 and like speed 7. So he can actually get kind of in a lot of places on the table. So just keep track of him. Try to kill him early if you can, and then you don't have to worry about it. But just keep track of where he's at, and you should be okay. But do note that he is there. I mentioned you'll see Eilish some. Yeah, Nayslayers, whatever. Watch out if there's Murder Crows. They get ambushed in the theme. You know, don't lose something out on a flank because you didn't remember that. Madcaps are important because they continue to make models, so if you can kill them, do so. One thing to consider is that the additional models are made... it does an additional like explodey thing if it's destroyed. If it is removed from play, it does not. And that brings me to sort of the last little tidbit that I had on my mind specifically about them, which is a lot of their triggers for their Arcana and a lot of their abilities actually do trigger on destroying models. So if you have access to RFP, you can really start to hose them over a little bit more. Like the Death Knell doesn't pick up corpses if you RFP, I believe. I have to double check that one, but I think that's the case. There's a lot of Arcana that say you have to destroy models, so if you RFP, they're not coming back. The Hollowmen I just mentioned, you're replacing models. If they're RFP'd, they don't come back. There was another one in there. Came up really recently, too. The Madcap I just was mentioning doesn't explode if you RFP it. And so on and so forth. There's just a lot of things. If you RFP them, you don't have to worry about them coming back. You don't have to worry about them triggering a bunch of abilities that happen on Destroyed. So consider that when you're building lists, that if you have some access to RFP, it's going to be great. Pardon. And then after that, you're going to, I mean, after that, we're starting to get into standard sort of places. Make sure you read through the spells. Make sure you sort of try to find the gotchas. Dreamer can move you closer. Watch on the Dreamer because she can drop extra phantasms that do give her extra rules, and they're very, very strong, so make sure you know what they do. And then, now the final thing is when you're playing around Arcana, whatever, you want to do your best to maximize your benefit while minimizing what they get out of it. And make sure that you are looking at the ones that you're actually concerned with. So like the Child's Trump Arcana, for example, is one that gives her battle group +1 Fury. So she goes Fury 8, they all go to Fury 5 Beasts. Or Fury 5 Heavies, Fury 4 Lights. Fury 3 Crabbits, I guess. And that does allow her to have a lot more output, right? That's one more boost, one more buy. For her, it's a higher stat for throwing out spells. However, the correct way to play there is to realize what your peace trading situation is, right? If you give them a heavy, they were going to kill it with 4 boosts worth of attacks. They're certainly going to kill it with 5. So don't rely on... wow. You know, anyway, my point is don't rely on that not triggering for your plan, right? Just assume, like, well, if they can get to me, I'm dead, or get to this important piece, it's dead, and the rest of my army's fine. And then it doesn't really matter that they have 5 Fury, right? On the other hand, look for something like the Dreamers who knock stuff down. So if you have things that don't have knockdown, be very careful of their activations, because you know... that they're relatively safe that turn. And talking about the Dreamers made me yawn, apparently. Things like that. Trying to think of other ones. The Heretic, for example, don't get too worried about his Trump Arcana. It's going to do more damage. He is going to get it. Try to keep things safe from being attacked. Things like that. So look at how important them doing the Arcana is. If they have Ruin, which stops a spell, make sure that you either don't care if that spell happens, and you have a backup plan, or you have the ability to cast it again. If they take Sacrifice, make sure you are attacking them whole to dead in order. Otherwise, you may end up wasting an entire turn. Again, that's very important. But if you read these things before the game starts, you can sort of start to mitigate what is okay and what is not okay. So anyways, this is just meant to be a high-level overview of Grymkin. I have played against some of it more than others. If there's some more specific things that I want to suggest out there to you, I'll take a look at them. But remember, magic weapons are important to have. Know their spell list, know their Arcana. Don't get analysis paralysis where you're trying to stop them from getting anything out of their Arcana. They're going to get it. Just assume it's like a feat. You're going to have to deal with it at some point and plan around that. Right, and then realize they'll only get one of them. Sometimes you can bully them into the wrong one too. So if you can do that, try to do that. Not bully like by verbally, saying stuff to them, but like with your presence on the table. Anyways, yeah. So that's a look at Grymkin. What to expect from them, and we may dive a little bit deeper into that as things evolve. Like I said, I played into them a fair amount, I think, for how long they've been out. And it might be worth visiting like a specific list at some point. Maybe we'll pull up like one from ATC and I'll talk about what you need to be concerned with. So anyways, as always, I thank you for tuning in. If you like the video, give me a thumbs up, share it out on social media. If you want to make sure you don't miss any of the episodes, go ahead and click the subscribe button. And thanks for watching, and we will see you